Hey Merfolk fans, I'm Joe. Thanks very much for joining me today. If you'd like to support my channel, please check the link above to my Patreon page. Well, it's been a while since my last update, but I have been playing a lot of Merfolk in the past few weeks. It hasn't really been too upload worthy though, because I've been basically testing a version of the deck that I'm was totally unfamiliar with. There's a quiet player named MHayashi. He doesn't really go to the Merfolk subreddit. He's not on the Discord. He's not on the MTGS website. So we really don't have a lot of information from him about how the deck works. But he's been having a ton of success with it over the course of 2 or 3 years. Multiple 5-0s in competitive leagues. And so I and a couple friends on the Discord I have been doing our best to jam games with this build and sort of see what it's all about. And so I have to say it was very foreign at first. You have some idea about how it plays out, but there's some real big question marks. The Deprives in the sideboard should be pretty familiar to all of you guys now. I've been running them in my lists for months now, and actually I got the inspiration from a MHayashi list. He's been running this in his sideboard as a playset for a really long time. And as it turns out, it's an excellent counter spell from Merfolk. We have AEther Vial, which often makes it pretty easy to bounce lands back to our hand. And honestly, once you get to 4 lands, you can keep bouncing a land and replaying it. We basically don't really need to have more than 4 lands in play at any time. So yeah, Deprive is a really strong card for our deck. So running the full playset in the board. But as for those question marks I was discussing, I mean, Chalice of the Void, it's been run in sideboards. People have even tried it in the main deck. But this build in particular is designed to capitalize on Chalice of the Void. If you'll notice, there's no 1-drops in the main deck. And the only 1-drops in the sideboard are Relic of Progenitus as a playset, because it's really far and away our most powerful option for graveyard hate. So even though it can potentially non-bow with a Chalice of the Void with X equals 1, it's still worth running the playset of Relic of Progenitus. If you get this down, it can cycle and replace itself, and just does a really great job against decks that care about their graveyard. So question marks include sort of how to play Chalice of the Void, against which decks is Chalice really solid, against which decks is it weak. There are some easy assumptions about certain matchups that are actually not really that correct. For example, Chalice of the Void, not really that great against blue-white control, against blue-red control. Those decks tend to have around 10 1-drops. And with Chalice of the Void, I think to sort of make it worthwhile, in my limited experience so far, you tend to want the decks to have around 15 or more 1-drops for Chalice to really be significant in the matchup. So you have decks like Burn that run a ton of 1-drops. Hollow One, obviously Affinity runs 0 and 1-drops. I'm not going to list all the decks that it's good against, but you really have to do your research before you go into a league running Chalice of the Void, because you might think that it's good in some matchups where it's really not that great. And the biggest question mark of all is Coralhelm Commander. Now, this is a card that back when Zendikar block, the original Zendikar block, was happening, Coralhelm Commander was played in Merfolk decks because he was one of the best choices available. Since then, we've gotten so many new options to play. Harbinger of the Tides, Master of Waves, and Merfolk Trickster, Tidebinder Mage, all of these guys. So Coralhelm Commander has definitely fallen by the wayside, but MHayashi has run a playset of this guy as long as he's been putting up 5-0s, which, as I mentioned, has been like for over the course of 2 or 3 years. So what's the deal with this guy? Why is he good in this particular build? Why is he good in Modern? And so, as it turns out, Coralhelm Commander is basically weak to 1-mana removal. He's weak to Path, he's weak to Fatal Push, he's weak to Bolt. But if you can get down a Chalice of the Void on turn 2 with X equaling 1, suddenly Coralhelm Commander has excellent protection against all those forms of removal. Sure, he's still weak to Terminate, but options like Collective Brutality and Kolaghan's Command can only do 2 damage to him. And if we get him up to level 2, which is really, really easy, you only need to invest 2 more mana, he suddenly has 3 toughness, which, again, avoids Collective Brutality and Kolaghan's Command, which is pretty awesome. If you get him up to level 4, after you pay 4 mana, then he's a 4/4 flyer, which is massive, right? That's like Stormbreath Dragon. And not for much more mana, right? We paid 2 to begin with and 4 in installments, which, you pay a slight cost for the flexibility of being able to do the payment in installments. 4/4 flyer, that buffs all of our Merfolk. And note that 4 toughness dodges basically all red removal. It dodges their board wipes with Pyroclasm, dodges Anger of the God, Sweltering Suns, 3 damage. Obviously dodges Lightning Bolt, Lightning Helix, all those kinds of 3 damage spells. So Chalice of the Void is kind of a combo with Coralhelm Commander because Chalice protects Coralhelm Commander and it protects your mana investment in this guy. So beyond that sort of combo, you have the fact, just the simple fact that Coralhelm Commander, with a small investment, becomes a 3/3 flyer. So there is a very popular deck in Modern right now that happens to run a playset of 3/3 flyers. It's humans, you guys might have guessed, with Mantis Rider, which we're really, really weak to. So Coralhelm Commander, you vial him in, pay 2 mana, suddenly you have a 3/3 flyer to compete with their Mantis Rider. You can trade, or you can race. If you get this guy up to 4/4, suddenly he's potentially stonewalling a Mantis Rider. So anything that can help our humans matchup is definitely worth consideration. Another matchup that has flyers is Hollow One with their Phoenixes. And so Coralhelm Commander is just massive compared to Flamewake Phoenix, so he can just stay back and prevent them from attacking with Phoenix while we get Island Walk online or while we go wider than they are. So, obviously Affinity plays a lot of flyers, and Coralhelm Commander getting in the air as a 3/3 can really jam up their game plan. Suddenly they can't really get in with those Signal Pests because we're just going to eat them. They can't really get in with their man lands. So even though my first impression was that this guy is super clunky, and I'm sure a lot of your guys' impressions of this guy is that he's rather clunky and just weak to removal, right? But every single match that I play with this guy, I learn a little bit more about why he's been chosen by MHayashi, basically. And so I just continue to test and research and sort of figure out how to sequence this guy in games. I've been working on a sideboard guide for you guys, but I don't want to put it out yet because I'm not really familiar with the ins and outs of the build yet. I'm not 100% set on the sideboard. Actually, I swapped in 4 Tidebinder Mages, replacing 4 Tectonic Edges that were in MHayashi's build. Tidebinder Mage just seems so good right now in Modern. There are so many decks that it helps against. From Jund to Burn to Humans to Bant to Green-White Value to Ponza to Abzan. Did I say Hollow One already? I don't even know. There's just so many decks that Tidebinder Mage helps against. It's not worth putting in the main deck because there still are a ton of decks that don't care at all about Tidebinder Mage, like Blue-White Control and just other control decks that don't really have a lot of red or green creatures to tap down. So it's definitely sideboard material. Again, this is replacing Tech Edge, but I'm starting to realize that this build is a little bit weak to Tron. If we're not on the play and we can't land Chalice of the Void on 1 right away and then hold up Deprive to counter something like an O-Stone that might potentially remove Chalice of the Void on 1, if we can't do that, if we're not on the play, it becomes a very difficult matchup for us. And so I can definitely see the reason for the Tech Edges in the sideboard. Tech Edge is something that helps us against all those Tron matchups. It also helps us against the very difficult Titan Shift matchups where we can sort of blow up the opponent's lands with Tech Edge. Tidebinder Mage is solid in the Titan Shift matchup because he can or she can lock down the Titan, which is excellent, but then of course, is weak to Lightning Bolt, can get removed, whereas Tech Edge just blowing up a land is pretty great value. So I'm actually leaning right now back towards swapping out the Tidebinder Mages, which obviously is going to require me to edit a large portion of my sideboard guide that I've been working on. So just let me talk a little bit about how my list is different from MHayashi's most recent 5.0. Starting over with the lands. In my initial testing, the first few leagues, I ran 4 Faerie Conclaves, just like MHayashi does, and has been for years. But it just felt too clunky to me. Having 4 tap lands really can gum up your opening few plays. Really, the dream is to play something like an island into AEther Vial, turn 2, another untapped land into Chalice of the Void. Like, that's exactly what this deck wants to do. And if one of your 2 opening lands is a Faerie Conclave, that's going to make it pretty difficult. Basically, you have to play Island, AEther Vial, and then basically take turn 2 off to play the Faerie Conclave. And then on turn 3, your entire play is basically just Chalice of the Void on 1, essentially taking an entire turn off for Faerie Conclave. Now, to explain why Faerie Conclave is in the deck, because a lot of you Merfolk players might be scratching your head about this, this build of Merfolk, I've come to find, is much, much slower than standard sort of stock Merfolk lists with something like 32 creatures. This list will get down a creature or 2, remove some of the opponent's threats with Dismember, turn off a lot of their cards with Chalice of the Void. It pushes games into later turns, and if you can say, get down a Merfolk Trickster on the opponent's end step, and then activate a Mutavault and a Faerie Conclave on turn 5, you're swinging for 6 points of damage, which is a big chunk of damage. If the opponent wants to spend their removal on our man lands, Faerie Conclave, Mutavault, that's really, really great for us, especially when the opponent does something like Path to Exile on Faerie Conclave or Mutavault, because then they're just replacing one of our lands, giving us another blue source, which is very helpful often for holding up Deprive or just really casting any of our blue-intensive spells. But even something like Lightning Bolt or Lightning Helix on Faerie Conclave or Mutavault is really preferable to them using it on something like a Coralhelm Commander. So sequencing-wise, you really just want to play out, things like Silvergills, things like Tricksters, things like Harbingers. Hold back your great creatures like the Island Walk Lords and Coralhelm Commanders until you have a whole bunch of lands down, a whole bunch of man lands down. Make the opponent go through a lot of their cards, get down to maybe 2 or 1 cards in hand, just putting pressure on with man lands. And then once they've sort of exhausted their resources, then we can start closing the game out. Throw down a Lord, get in for the final few points with a Mutavault, unblockable, or on turn 6 or something, vial in a Coralhelm Commander, pay 4 mana, and start swinging for 4 in the air. It can be really hard for the opponent to keep up with all of our threats. But you really don't want to just dump your hand like you might have wanted to do with the more stock Merfolk lists. So we still have 4 Spreading Seas, same as Hayashi says. It's got the 4 AEther Vials, 4 Chalice Void. Basically, 90% of the deck is the same, but I've trimmed 1 Conclave. Let's see. What were the other changes? He has, I think, a 3rd Echoing Truth in the board to make the full playset. That's right. He was only running 19 lands, so I added in the 20th land because, again, it's kind of a personal preference thing. I've tried 19 lands many times over the years, and I really prefer 20. And even in this build, 20 has felt great. So I trimmed 1 of the Echoing Truths for an island. I moved the 4th Dismember to the sideboard. And yeah, pretty much everything is exactly the same as his list, and I've been enjoying it. I've been getting to know it, and it's a really fun build. Chalice is amazing against a lot of decks, and I think I'll just go ahead and jump into a match for you guys. I've had some success with my leagues. I started off actually with a 5-0, which got me really excited about the build. So I played a bunch more since then, and a lot of 2-3s, 2 and 3s, a lot of 3 and 2s, maybe a 4-1. Currently, I'm in a league and I'm like at 3-0, so feeling pretty good about that. The deck feels better as I basically get better at the deck. So this is a replay of a friendly match. Let's go ahead and have a look at the opening hands. So I don't know what opponent I'm playing against. This is sort of one of those borderline keeps. 4 lands, but one of them is a Mutavault, which is really great in a lot of matchups. Spreading Seas is hopefully going to replace itself unless it gets sort of Inquisitioned. We've got a couple creatures. We've got some land hate, and we've got Aether Vial, which is obviously, you know, a sensational turn 1 play. So the opponent kept. And I'm going to open up Mutavault into Aether Vial here. If an opponent takes away my Spreading Seas with an Inquisition, at least we'll be able to poke in with Mutavault. I very rarely play Mutavault first. We have so many spells that we want to play for double blue, especially like Merfolk Trickster. We want to be able to hold up double blue. But this particular opening hand made me want to play Mutavault first. Okay, so it looks like Affinity and Bomat Courier. So this is a relatively new flavor of Affinity. Bomat Courier is going to get in. He's going to exile a card from his library, and I'm going to go down to 19. All right, so I take the damage, trying to go through here, and all right, for some reason this is taking a little while. Come on, MTGO. I know you want to do it. Well, I'm sorry for this. Okay, that's I just got hung up for some reason. Maybe the opponent had sort of sat around for a little while. All right, so for my turn, I'm going to tick Aether Vial up, drew another Aether Vial. But I think the best option here is just to jam Spreading Seas. Obviously, Affinity doesn't care too much about colors of their lands, but this is just going to give me access to Island Walk later, and we just want to draw cards at this point. This hand is a little bit underdeveloped at this moment. Okay, so we drew into another Island Walk Lord, which is actually perfect. Combos with that Spreading Seas, and also just makes our Mutavault gigantic. So Affinity opponent has a Springleaf Drum, and they're going to tap out to get a Steel Overseer down. All right, so being on the front foot this game, really great for us. We're going to be able to get our 3rd land down ahead of them, and just really sort of explode with Aether Vial here. Faerie Conclave, probably not going to sort of play into this match here. It looks like it's going to be pretty explosive. So I'd like to get both lords down, so obviously I just need to play an island this turn. So I might as well jam the 2nd Aether Vial, and then I'll pass the turn with the other lord up, getting ready to swing for 10 on the following turn. Okay, opponent has a Signal Pest. That thing's got Summoning Sickness, though, so it's not a huge threat right now. Well, and here's a Ravager. So this thing is particularly lethal in combination with Steel Overseer, because this guy keeps putting +1 counters, which can then be obviously redistributed by the Arcbound Ravager as the opponent sees necessary. So chooses not to attack. Probably smart. I would have brought in a Lord and just eaten the Bomat Courier. But I do have Island Walk, so we get to start getting aggro. All right, so as I mentioned, I've got 10 power here. It's a 2-turn clock currently. So one thing to point out about this list is that without Master of Waves or Mara Regery, we get to leave all of our Aether Vials on 2 all the time, which might seem sort of unnecessary or silly because, you know, we've been able to manage our Aether Vials in the past, you know, taking it up one up to 4 and one up to 2. But sometimes we'll tick one up to 4 from Master of Waves and then be low on lands and just be stuck with all these 2-drops in our hand. It is very advantageous, actually, to have one target for your Aether Vials and just always leave it there. Not only does it just help you not make any unnecessary miscalculations with your Aether Vials. It just is one fewer decision that you have to worry about in a match. All right, so Silvergill is another body. Now, I can't cast this guy because I don't have another Merfolk in hand, so I really think I just want to Vial him in and sort of see what I draw, know what I can work with. All right, another Mutavault is more beef, so I'm going to activate this first Mutavault and get in for 10, as I mentioned. It's that 2-turn clock. Opponent doesn't have an extremely threatening board presence, so I feel pretty good about this. And I'll go ahead and play the second Mutavault. Doing some quick math, we added 8 more power to the board, so potentially swinging for 18 next turn. All right, the opponent has an Inkmoth Nexus into a Bomat Courier. They're down to 2 cards in hand. Activate the Steel Overseer, and with Signal Pest, this is actually a pretty healthy attack. So Bomat Courier is going to get to exile something. Signal Pest trigger goes on the stack. Okay, 2 Bomat Couriers. And let's just sort of look at what we're dealing with here. Getting in for 4, 6, 10, 13. We're sitting comfortably at 19. The opponent had just gotten in with 1 Bomat Courier so far. Rechecking that math, it's 13. The opponent can sacrifice a Springleaf Drum and a Steel Overseer if they wanted to onto the Arcbound Ravager, which would then make it 15, which puts us within... it puts us within their burn spell, which is slipping my mind right now, of course. Galvanic Blast, there it is. So if the opponent sacked his 2 artifacts that aren't attacking, it would be 15, and then plus 4 with Galvanic Blast would be Xaxes. However, they're on 2 cards, and if I block, let's see. If I chose to block one of his bigger creatures, like let's say I block the Arcbound Ravager. Well, no, that would probably not be correct, because then he could just immediately redistribute the counters and still push that damage, right? So if he did the sack, then it would be 6, going on to this would be 10, it'd still be 15. So we wouldn't want to block the Arcbound Ravager, we'd probably just block the Bomat Courier, right? In which case, the opponent might sack it to put it on the Arcbound Ravager and then put it on something else, but in any event, blocking the Bomat Courier at least prevents 4 points of damage, or 3, I guess. The sack Bomat, Steel Overseer, Springleaf Drum, put it on the Arcbound Ravager, at which point he'd become a 7, plus 5 is 12, but then we'd still have a 7-point buffer for life, I think. Anyhow, the reason I'm going through all this, and I did think about it during the match, is let's say that I do that block and these guys trade. I'm not within lethal distance for a Galvanic Blast, but if the opponent does have a Galvanic Blast, they could use it on a Lord, in which case I only have, let's see, it would be 2 plus 3 and 3, which would be, so use it on a Lord, this guy would die in attacks, and I'd only have 2, 3, and 3, which would be 8, and I'd really like to finish the game next turn, because if he has the blast for a Lord and I swing and don't kill him next turn, then he's still going to have more than enough to kill me the following turn. So in the end, I chose not to block. I really probably should have blocked, I think. I could have drawn, if I drew any other Island Walk Lords and attacked, it would be 11 next turn, 3, 4, and 4, even if he blasted one of my Island Walk Lords. So as it went, I didn't block, and I got punished for it. So let's see how that played out. So sacks a Springleaf Drum, that's an easy decision. At this point, I'm set to take 14 points of damage. So he actually sacks the Steel Overseer as well. So that's 10 plus 5 is 15. I go down to 4. The opponent taps out for Shrapnel Blast. Now, this is not a typical card in Affinity. This guy is definitely running a sort of brew. So he sacked an artifact, and this deals 5 damage to me. Unfortunately, I don't have something like a negate in hand to counter this, and I lost from what I considered to be a nearly unwinnable position. So kudos to the Affinity player, and sort of shame on me for allowing him to get there, I guess. One thing I failed to remark upon a moment ago was that if the opponent wanted to cast the Galvanic Blast, or in this case the Shrapnel Blast, he was going to have to pay 1 life with the Spire of Industry to cast it, because otherwise he has no access to colored mana. But that still, if I traded a Silvergill Adept and then he Galvanic Blasted a Lord, it'd still be at 9, and I'd still only be swinging for 8 the following turn. So a pretty complicated situation. I should have blocked. I didn't. But let's go ahead and just see how game 2 went. All right. So. All right, back for game 2. Thanks again for joining me today, guys. I know I haven't been the most regular YouTube content creator of late, but as I mentioned, I've been testing this build a lot, and honestly, my videos wouldn't be that interesting. So I'm just picking some of the more interesting matches for you guys to see. So this is a keep for me. It's got removal with Dismember. It's got Chalice to shut off X equals 0 for those super explosive openings with Ornithopters, Memnites, Opals. The opponent kept 7, always a bit scary going up against Affinity. So I'm going to go ahead and play my island and just get Chalice out on 0 right away. Okay, so we see a Signal Pest, and that's probably going to be it since we've got their 0 drops turned off. Okay, so on my turn, I drew a Merfolk Trickster, which is going to be really great if I can draw that second blue source. As it went, I haven't drawn another land yet, so I can play the Silvergill and sort of just hope that I hit that blue source. Pretty much always just reveal an Island Walk Lord because opponents, with us having 8 of them, pretty much assume that we already have one anyway. So revealing the Master of the Pearl Trident gives away the least amount of information in a lot of situations. Second Island Walk Lord is great. We can still currently play out an AEther Vial if we draw it, since Chalice is on 0. But we just really want to draw a blue source at this point. Alright, opponent has a second Inkmoth Nexus for Cranial Plating, but super slow opening with them still stuck on 5 cards in hand. So this is what Chalice can do for some matchups. It just slows it down and gives us a chance to actually do something. So another Chalice, and even though I'm starved on lands and an AEther Vial would be excellent, I'm going to use this opportunity to get this Chalice down for 1. But first, probably better to go with attacks, so the opponent doesn't really know what I'm up to. Takes 2, and then I'm going to go ahead and jam this Chalice of the Void. Now it's totally possible they just have a handful of 2 and 3 drops, but they also have a lot of 1 drops between the Signal Pest and Galvanic Blast. And there's at least 1 other card that I can't think of right now. All right, so we're doing a great job slowing the opponent down. All they can do this turn is get in for 2 poison. And if this is their plan, as long as I draw land at some point, I'm going to have more than enough ways to deal with this kind of a situation. Like I've got the Dismember, Merfolk Trickster can just eat one of these guys, and Coralhelm Commander as a flyer is also super solid. All right, so I'm up to 2 poison. That's a 5-turn clock. All right, so there's that island. So I will get in with the Silvergill Adept, and to me it looks like the best line is probably to hold up Trickster and Dismember. Hopefully just sort of dismantle the opponent's entire game plan. So we see a Vault Scourge, which kind of complicates things because we'd probably want to hold up the Trickster to prevent them from gaining life next turn with the Vault Scourge. Okay, we see the Cranial Plating is getting equipped. Signal Pest is getting in, And, you know, with them locked out with the Chalice, I think it seems reasonable to me to just use my Dismember on this guy, and then potentially just Trickster the guy next turn. Keep poking in with Silvergill Adept, hopefully just draw into some lands. A Harbinger is quite nice because I can Trickster and then bounce him, and that's just a huge tempo gain. So that's a pretty clear line. For those of you who haven't gotten too many reps in yet with Merfolk Trickster, it's actually a really, really effective combo with Harbinger because you can tap a creature on the opponent's turn, developing your board at the same time. And then on your turn, after you tap that creature on the opponent's turn, you can play a Harbinger, get that creature off the board while continuing to develop your own board. So here I am getting in with the Silvergill Adept. Opponent's already down to 12. I'm at 16, but that's just from my own Dismember. I expect they'll equip the Cranial Plating. Yep. Okay, activating Inkmoth Nexus. They're still stuck with 6 cards in hand. It's highly unusual for Affinity to have so many cards in hand on turn 5, but I have a feeling the Chalices are to blame for that. So I'm not even going to let this Vault Scourge go into combat here. Just going to tap him so the opponent doesn't get to gain any life. We've got this really slow clock going with Inkmoth Nexus. Definitely not afraid of that. Now, playing out Harbinger next turn kind of plays into Whip Flare, but the opponent currently doesn't have any access to colored mana. Now that is another 1-drop that Chalice on 1 hits is Springleaf Drum. So very possible that the opponent has some number of Mox Opals and Springleaf Drums in their hand that they can't play out because of the 2 Chalices. Okay, Lord of Atlantis, we like having gas, but we're backed up on lands. But this is how this deck rolls, you know? It slows things down a ton. It looks to me like the best plan here is just to get this silly Vault Scourge off the board. So go ahead and play this Harbinger, bounce the Vault Scourge. Now remember that the opponent's going to have to pay 2 life just to replay that guy. Go ahead and get in for 4, take the opponent down to 8, and we are getting within striking distance here. Okay, activating the Inkmoth. I'm going to equip the Cranial Plating. Now this is a losing line because I have 8 power on board. It's still pretty threatening because it's a 4-powered infect creature, but we're just sitting at 3 poison right now, so not quite sure what the opponent was thinking there. They probably should have just played out the Vault Scourge, put the plating on that guy, tried to block and gain some life. Basically, that was their only line. You can see they had 8 cards in hand at the end of the game, so excellent job, Chalices. And yeah, 1-1. Let's go ahead to game 3 and see how the match concluded. All right, hey guys, I'm back for the 3rd game here against Affinity. They are going to be on the play, which is always a disadvantage. This is a painful hand because Merfolk Trickster is so incredible in this matchup, and we have an island to start working with. But it's so easy to whiff. We could hit a Mutavault, we could hit no lands at all, we could hit, I don't know, Faerie Conclaves where things just get too slow. AEther Vial would still be pretty slow. So you shouldn't be afraid to mulligan, you know? This is, anytime you have 1 land without AEther Vial, it should be an easy decision to mulligan. So the opponent kept on the play, and I can't go to 5 cards against Affinity. Now, I'm on the draw, and I get Scry. So I get to look, if I keep this, I get to look at the top card. If it's a land, obviously I'll keep it there. If it's not, I get to ship it away, and I get another shot at drawing a land. So in difficult matchups, you kind of are priced into taking the high variance line a lot of the times. And I think if I go down to 5 cards, I'm just very, very unlikely to compete against an Affinity opening 7 with them on the play. So I kept this hand, even though it's super sketchy. It was a hard decision. Echoing of Truth is going straight to the bottom. And we're just crossing our fingers and hoping for land. So there's a Mox Opal, which I wish I had a Chalice down for. We see a Springleaf Drum on 1. The opponent getting those out of his hand early. But no creatures. Interesting. Okay, well, I drew a land. You know, thank goodness. It happens to be a tap land, which is really, really bad in this spot, but it's way, way better than nothing. So get on the board, Conclave. And it looks like the opponent is not bringing the most explosive opening, so maybe we can get something rolling here. Here's a Signal Pest, which can work with Springleaf Drum. Now the opponent can activate his Opal. Arcbound Ravager. Okay, so another Mox Opal. Looks like they want to go for something else here. And another Springleaf Drum. So basically a lot of gas for the Ravager, right? This is all kind of trash. It's all just mana. And they are down to 1 card already, and that's way more typical for Affinity, but to have 1 card on turn 2. So I drew another Faerie Conclave. So this is the reason why I trimmed Conclaves from MHayashi's 4, the full playset, down to 3. Because the card is extremely valuable. It can eat Signal Pests, it can block big flyers and give us another chance to attack, give us another turn. And it just applies pressure without even playing creatures, but it can make for some really clunky openings. I have to say this is highly unusual, drawing 2 out of my 3 in the first 2 lands. So don't take this as any kind of typical situation. You guys know my play here. I'm just going to throw AEther Vial down and get my second Conclave onto the table. At this point, I'm getting set to have an active Trickster, and AEther Vial is going to start ticking up. So let's just hope the opponent doesn't have some crazy, crazy stuff here. Wow, so Master of Ethereum is an excellent target for Merfolk Trickster. For those of you who don't know, this guy's power and toughness is entirely defined by his text box. So Merfolk Trickster turns him into a 0/0, which just kills him. So Merfolk Trickster just became a removal spell for their 3-drop, giving us a chance to stay in this match. Okay, getting in with the Ravager. I take 2, go down to 18. Now this is exactly the kind of opening that I needed to have a shot in this game. The opponent only getting in for 2 points of damage on turn 3. And they're down to 1 card. So take the AEther Vial up to 1. And drew Echoing Truth. So we have a really interesting hand here. Spreading Seas turns off their Blinkmoth Nexus. Trickster kills the Master of Ethereum. Spreading Seas obviously also turns on Island Walk. We've got some card draw with Silvergill Adept. Unfortunately, the Echoing Truth is great to have, but we'd really would have preferred, I think, for that to be a land, because then we could have held up Trickster while playing an AEther Vial this turn. I think the clear play here is just to hold up Trickster, kill the Master of Ethereum, probably block what will become a 1/1 Arcbound Ravager once the Master is off the board, force some kind of sacks onto the Arcbound Ravager, make them overcommit a little bit, and then maybe we'll draw Harbinger, bounce the Arcbound Ravager, and then once he redistributes the counters onto something else, like an Echoing Truth, that thing. Yeah, so we got to start dealing with their threats one by one. Against pretty much all the aggressive matchups in Modern, Merfolk wants to be the control deck. We are not the beatdown against Affinity. We're not the beatdown against Hollow One. We're not the beatdown against humans. So we have to aim to play a more controlling game for the first few turns. And once we've dealt with their threats, whether with Dismember or Trickster or Harbinger or Echoing Truth, then around turn 3, 4, 5, we can start to turn the corner and sort of push our own board. The opponent looks like he drew a land, or at least he had another land in hand, and here is another Arcbound Ravager. Now this might seem excellent since we have an Echoing Truth in hand, but you have to be careful against Arcbound Ravager because he has this sacrifice ability. If I were to target this Arcbound Ravager, he could just easily sack it and put the counters on the other Arcbound Ravager, and then since Echoing Truth just has one target, once that target ceases to exist, it doesn't bounce anything. So really, Echoing Truth trying to hit multiple Arcbound Ravagers is not a line that is effective. So just be aware of that. So we are going to have to figure out a way to deal with these multiple Arcbound Ravagers. So let's go ahead and let the opponent get in here. He thinks he's swinging for 9, but he's actually really just swinging for 1. He's totally empty-handed now, which is huge for us because it really just helps me craft the best plan of attack. So let's go ahead and kill this Master of Ethereum. It's one of the best applications of Merfolk Trickster. It's just incredible. So we really want to force decisions here, as I was saying. So let's get in front of this Arcbound Ravager. The opponent knows I can't buff him or anything, so he probably just wants to sack a couple of artifacts, probably the Springleaf Drums, just to get this guy up to a 3/3. And that's fine with me. It's trimming down his board, giving him fewer resources to work with. Once I've dealt with these guys, they might even get so low on artifacts that Mox Opal might not even be active anymore. So I'm going to lose this Trickster, but we're kind of channeling the opponent's plays in a certain direction. We're going to take our AEther Vial up to 1 here. Up from 1 to 2. And draw land? No, I drew another Island Walk Lord. So this put me in a tricky spot. Silvergill will draw me a card, and I'd really love to draw cards now. Ideally hitting a land to play AEther Vial. The opponent isn't super threatening right now. Even if he sacks the Opal, the most he's getting in for next turn with the buffs from Signal Pest is going to be like 4 and 3 for 7. We're going to be able to continue to develop. But as I was just mentioning, we really are trying to channel the opponent's movements in a certain direction. We want them to sort of feel forced into some action with these Arcbound Ravagers. I have only played 1 creature this game. I've obviously had a really, really slow development with 2 tap lands in the opening, and I missed a land drop last turn. And I'm missing a land drop this turn, so the opponent probably feels very much in the driver's seat. So we need to allow him to continue to think that they're in control while trying to force action with these Arcbound Ravagers. So I decided ultimately that the best line was going to be to play an Island Walk Lord, let him attack, flash in the other Island Walk Lord, and then throw them both in front of one of the Arcbound Ravagers to try to force action. And just hope that they don't draw anything amazing. So here they are activating Blinkmoth Nexus. It doesn't look like they drew anything that great. Looks like they're probably going to attack with everybody. Again, this is kind of what Affinity has to do. It's not like the opponent's making any mistakes or anything here. So we've got 2, 6, and 8 getting in here. Now, I decided to bring in the Island Walk Lord and get in front, throw a double block in front of the little Arcbound Ravager. Now, if we go in front of the big one, it's 6 toughness. If they want this guy to live, they can sack Opal, this guy, throw them on this. In the end, it might not make a huge amount of difference which Arcbound Ravager I go in front of. I felt that going in front of the little one might force more sacrificing action. So that's what I went with. Now, the opponent could easily just let this guy die, or sack the Opal to make him a 3/2, and then kill one of my lords. He would still have a superior board. He would still get in for 6 this turn. I'd go down to 12. I'd be left with just 1 Island Walk Lord. I do have 4 cards in hand. So at this point, it's really up to the opponent. I don't know what he's going to do. Let's just sort of see how it played out. Okay, so it started off by sacrificing the, if you look at the graveyard, he sacrificed the Signal Pest, I believe. Oh no, no, Signal Pest is still there. It was a Springleaf Drum, I guess. No, I'm sorry. He sacrificed the Arcbound Ravager. Oof. I don't know how I missed that. I just assumed the first thing he would sack wasn't an Arcbound Ravager. So immediately this guy gets a whole bunch of counters put onto him, and now he's set to trade with my 2 lords, since he has 6 power. But it looks like that's not enough for the Affinity opponent. He sacks the Opal. Now this is a 7/6. We're still set to trade, but he wouldn't have sacked the Opal if he wasn't planning on going all in. So there it is, sacrificing the Signal Pest, and now this guy's just straight up eating my 2 lords. It's going to leave an 8/7 and a Blinkmoth Nexus on the board, but no damage is being pushed this turn. So whether that was optimal play or not by the Affinity opponent, it leaves him with a really anemic board, and he's got 1 card in hand. So that was one of the more enjoyable gambits that I've gotten to play, really as long as I could remember. It was a bit of a risk, potentially throwing away 2 lords, but it kind of accomplished the goal I was after. The opponent, we see that the 1 card he had left in hand is a Glimmer Void, which at first seemed exciting because I thought if I bounce his Arcbound Ravager, I could blow up his Glimmer Void, but the Glimmer Void can just activate the Blinkmoth Nexus, which would accomplish 2 different goals for the Affinity player. It would save the Glimmer Void by creating an artifact when activating the Nexus, but it would also let him redistribute all of the +1 counters onto the Blinkmoth Nexus. So between Spreading Seas for the Blinkmoth and Echoing Truth for the Arcbound Ravager, I felt like I was sitting rather pretty here, but sequencing is going to be really delicate. So drawing another Island Walk Lord is great. We need some kind of clock to start hitting the opponent's life total. So as I was mentioning, sequencing is super important here. If I go for Spreading Seas first, he could just activate Glimmer Void, sack the Blinkmoth Nexus to the Arcbound Ravager, and he would become an 8/8. I would be tapped out. If he draws another artifact creature, of which they have many in the deck, then if I try to Echoing Truth the Arcbound Ravager, he could just put all those counters onto the other creature. Now, if I flip the order and instead try to bounce the Arcbound Ravager now, he would probably just activate the Blinkmoth Nexus, or definitely activate the Blinkmoth Nexus, put the counters on it. Again, I'd be tapped out, but I'd only take 8 next turn from the Blinkmoth Nexus, and then on my next turn I can untap, put the Spreading Seas on the Blinkmoth, and then hopefully just totally neutralize the opponent. So the play here is to just bounce the Arcbound Ravager. First, of course, it makes sense to put in the Silvergill Adept and see what we draw. Dismember is really nice. Actually, it would be spectacular in this situation if we had a 3rd land, because we could initiate that sequence I was talking about, trying to bounce the Arcbound Ravager, and then in response to him trying to redistribute the counters, I could dismember his Blinkmoth Nexus, leaving him with just Spire of Industry, because in that situation, the Glimmer Void would actually blow up on his end step because he would no longer control any artifacts. But without a 3rd land, the play that I outlined earlier is going to stand. Opponent activates the Blinkmoth. He's going to dump all those counters onto it. And yeah, game on. Let's see what the opponent draws. Springleaf Drum does nothing. So he's going to do his best to close it out here. This looks like a 2-turn clock for him. I don't have access to any flyers since I don't have enough mana to activate Faerie Conclave. And in any event, Faerie Conclave is just a chump against this guy. All right, I'm down to 8. Any player might not be feeling too bad here, but I've had this Spreading Seas in my hand basically since the opening hand, so the plan is coming to fruition. We're going to keep AEther Vial on 2 and see what we draw. Well, there's that 3rd land, but I'm just going to go ahead and dump this Spreading Seas before I play a land, because if I draw a Mutavault, that might be preferable to just jamming Oboro. As it went, I drew an island. Play Oboro. You know, if the opponent draws into Whip Flare, he could wipe away my board, but it's still worth it for me to just push this Master of the Pearl Trident right now. If the opponent's empty-handed, you should not ever play around 1 card, unless that card is a way for the opponent to just strictly win the game. I mean, if he wipes my board right now, it's not the end of the world. I can keep poking him with Faerie Conclave. My deck is full of Merfolk, and pushing more damage now just feels better. So opponent drew a land. Things are moving in a great direction for us. Another Dismember just is not great because I can only use 1 since it costs 4 life each time. So kind of a dead draw there, but I can swing for 7 here. And then if I draw another Island Walk Lord, it would be 4, 3, and 2. So it's still... Let's see. I would need to draw 2 more lands to be able to activate the 2nd Conclave. So that doesn't increase my clock. I'm going to swing for 7 here. They're going to go down to 10. And I don't think there's a way that I can swing for 10 next turn. Let's see, if I draw the Lord, Coralhelm, could buff him. Nope. So anyhow, I think it's still a 2-turn clock after this, but the opponent just scooped it up at that point. I guess they felt that whatever they drew probably wouldn't be enough, and it's probably the case because, let's see, Faerie Conclave is a blue fairy creature, so if you drew an Master of, not Master of Ethereum, if you drew Etch Champion, that guy could get in, but it's still a 3-turn clock, and I've got Island Walk and Flyers. So they might just not have outs. I mean, if I attack next turn for 9, he could still draw Whip Flare, kill my creatures, then I just close it out with 2 points in the air. So anyhow, that was a really, really wild game. My opponent kept his opening 7 on the play as an Affinity pilot, and I managed to get there with a 0-land mulligan to 6. So I don't know if any of you guys have that merit badge yet. Win against Affinity on the draw with a no-land mulligan to 6. So I'm pretty proud of that result. Not so proud of game 1 where I could have just blocked and won, but I was really happy with the result of the match. So you saw a little bit of what Chalice of the Void can do. You saw a little bit of what Faerie Conclave can do. You saw a little bit of what Merfolk Trickster can do, killing a Master of Ethereum in this game here. So yeah, the deck, it feels really, really powerful, but still a bit foreign to me. I'm still trying to feel it out, but I will absolutely keep you guys posted as I make discoveries. And once I wrap up my sideboard guide, I will definitely get that in your guys' hands. So I hope you enjoyed the replay. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Leave any comments you might have down below. And please check out my Patreon page if you'd like to support my channel. As always, I really appreciate you guys tuning in. Please continue to tune in. I'll have more of these sort of featured matches that have sort of sporadically been popping up as I've been testing this MHayashi Chalice of the Void build of Merfolk. So thanks again, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.